we hope, highly dynamic ecosystem. And when we start to study an ecosystem, we want to look at the ecosystem dynamics of that particular area. We look at the life history of that particular ecosystem. What are all the patterns in the history of this pond, for example? When did it form? How did it form? What contributed to its formation? The physical environment, how did that affect it or change it or not? What was the climate like? What are all the seen and unseen organisms that comprise this pond? And of course the critters and plants around it that contribute to it as well. What's going on in the water, what's going on in the soil. We also look at the population distribution of this pond. These are things that you guys all know working with ecosystems. Where do all the organisms live around this pond? And how do they interact or not? Are they mobile or not? What about the abundance of the organisms? How many are there? Where do they choose to live around or in the pond? So we're looking at the dynamics, also the population growth and regulation. How fast do the organisms around this pond grow, or how slow? What affects that growth rate? What regulates it? So the dynamics around this pond is how all the organisms in this pond live in relationship to each other and to the environment. How are they interdependent, and how do they compete for resources? What are the stressors and pressures that they face at different stages of their life? The human ecosystem is very much like a pond as well. We have a lot going on that we can see, or that the world sees, or our friends see, our family sees, but there's also a lot going on that no one can see, that we don't necessarily show people. So things that we don't see, sort of above the waterline and below the waterline. But when we look at our ecosystem, we too also start to look at the life history and dynamics of our human ecosystem. And how do we examine that? We can use ecological tools, but the examination itself is certainly more a psychological and mythological examination or assessment. So the human ecosystem, looking at our life history or dynamics, what does that mean? Well, we would want to know our life history, our story, what happened, what was going on for Mother when she carried us in the womb. We know now, just in the last 2 years, that everything that mother is engaged with, every event, every relationship, interaction in her life affects that baby. And so those are things that we want to know too. It's kind of interesting. You go back to your mom and ask, what was going on for you when I was, you were pregnant for me. My mom had a car wreck, so there's lots of things. I'm not saying that's made my brain weird, but maybe it has. But those kind of things affect us, what goes on with the mother. We also want to look at our family stories. What about our lineage? What happened in our family? Were we our only child, or did we have a number of siblings? And what was the relationship like with our siblings? Or if we were our only child, what was the relationship like with our parents? Or extended family members? What about our social circle? The social circles that we were involved with growing up, negative and positive. Where we lived. Was there a particular place that we lived that we were absolutely connected to? And that we had to leave that place eventually, or we were taken from that place eventually. That affects us. And when I say affects us, I mean those kinds of events start to help construct our story that we tell us about ourselves. All these events matter. So the human dynamics is very, very, complex in a sense. All the interactions and experiences of our childhood with our connection to place, people. What about our vocation or jobs that we did growing up? How did those events start to shape our way of thinking about things? Our intimate relationship dynamics, of course. Our life stressors and pressures as well. When major things happen to us in our life, how did that shape how we think about something today? Or determine our behavior around something based on what happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. We don't necessarily think about that. So the experiences that we've had in our life, both positive and negative, then are part of our story, part of our narrative that help to create who we are. It's our life story. When you meet someone and they say, well, what's your story? Who are you? Where'd you come from? So it has to do with a lot more than just, coming from a particular place or our family name. Another example of this is when we look at the human ecosystem, if we think about ecologically, if we think about individual members of a species that grow and mature at different rates in our pond, we too have the same kind of dynamic. Members of our family grow very differently. Humans, of course, grow at different rates, we know that. Humans' development is very different, even within our own family. And this can make a difference in how we see things or perceive things. Individual variation in the natural world is as diverse as it is in our human world. Think of family members who develop different ways of thinking, different lifestyles. We come from the same family, but we have a very different perspective or attitude about something. Politics or religion especially are heated places within a family. So although we may come from the same family, we have different stories because we've had different experiences from those events growing up. We have different family sizes. We live in different areas. And this too can affect our way of thinking about things. An example of this is if you came from a small town and you didn't have the opportunity to move around a lot. Maybe your family stayed in that location for whatever reason. There's several ways you could perceive that. One may be that you felt stuck or claustrophobic, that you didn't have experiences to different opportunities for that. So, of course, as you grew up and left the world, left that particular area, if you did, you may really try to embrace lots of different experiences and opportunity because you didn't have those growing up, because you stayed in one location. Another person in the same town who's had the very same experience, they never left their hometown, they felt like that was actually a good thing. They felt that it was a safe container for them. It provided a safety haven, and they never left. They never leave that particular community because that for them was a positive thing. So our experiences shape us, and they can certainly shape us very differently even within our own family. So in one sense, what might create a sense of freedom for one might create a sense of anxiety for another. And these are very interesting things to know about ourselves, because when we come to the table, we start to negotiate and work through very, very difficult issues. Everyone brings their stories to the table, and they're talking to you, they're relating to you, they're negotiating with you, they're arguing with you from some of these earlier narratives that have shaped the way they think about something. So when we start to really look at our ecosystem, if you will, to understand our life history and our life dynamics, I like to use 5 of the ecological principles to do this with, to sort of unpack our pond, if you will. I use everything runs on energy. We know this, one of the principles in ecology. The second one is diversity is necessary for a system to flourish, of course, the same for us. There's no waste in the natural world, but lots of waste in human practices and behaviors. Change is inevitable. Every ecosystem will need to undergo change, or does undergo change. And everything is connected. So I'll use these 5 principles, and this is really what we'll spend the bulk of our day doing, is going through our personal ecosystem, looking at it from the perspective of energy, diversity, waste, change, connectivity.
Can you just repeat like the energy one?
Yeah, and I'll repeat these during the day. Everything runs on energy. Diversity is necessary for an ecosystem to flourish. There's no waste in the natural world, but there's lots of waste in human practices and behaviors. Change is inevitable, and everything is connected. So ecologically, within each, sorry, here they are here as well. Ecologically, within each ecosystem, we find processes of decay and renewal. This is what happens. This is what an ecosystem is. There's always something dying and there's something being renewed, some new form of life. So processes of decay and renewal that result from constant interactions between the living organisms and their environment. Psychologically, this is also true of the human ecosystem. The human ecosystem can be described as also an ecosystem that has constant processes of decay and renewal in our psychology, in other words, in our attitudes, our behaviors, our belief systems. And they also result from constant interactions between us and our environment, between us and other people. Of course, our family, again, going back to our life history, events, experiences we had growing up, how we relate in daily life, and of course our interactions. So ecopsychology teaches us how and why to pay attention to these processes in our ecosystem, and that's what we're going to do today, so that we are able to begin to develop the capacities to feel or intuit when we're out of balance, when we're not able to use our instincts, have gotten away from our instincts, we're not using our intuition perhaps, we're not gathering information and bringing in data in a particular way. It also helps us learn to spot patterns and become aware of things that we just didn't previously know about ourselves. This is very, very important when we start to work with behavior change. And this is also what I mean by the psychological dimension, bringing a heightened sense of our instincts to bear to the discussion. Different perceptions or a way of perceiving things that might be more psychological, more intuitive, more empathic, if you will. So we widen our perspectives. And it also calls for us to develop the ability to hold tensions. And this is very important in ecopsychology because, well, in life, let's get real, we always are engaged in relationships where there's tension. And that's a good thing. It provides eros many times. It provides, the passions that we need to do the things that we want to do in the world, and certainly falling in love. But those tensions also can be places of difficult discourse and opposite feelings or thinking about things, opposite approaches to things. So a psychological dimension, then, what I'm arguing or what I'm suggesting then allows us to have more relational solutions. More relational solutions. It may not be the optimal, it may not be the best, it may be a start, but the solution that we come to, we would be in relationship with the people that we're working on that solution with. Okay. So we're going to start with everything runs on energy. That's our first area today. And what I want to do is work with our ecosystem and how we understand our particular sense of energy. We know everything needs some type of energy to function, from bacteria to plants to these incredible computers and technology that we've blessed with to have at the conference. From cities to stars, everything needs a source of energy. And of course, there are different forms of energy that we won't go into today because we don't have time, but just have in the back of your mind here, we know that energy can be transported from one object to another. So that's kind of interesting to think about how we use our energy. We know that energy comes in multiple forms, of course, kinetic, thermal, electromagnetic, electrochemical, sound, nuclear. And I would also suggest subtle, that there's an exchange of subtle energies. When someone walks in the room and you just get a feeling. You may not be able to articulate it, but you get a feeling about that person. And it can be positive or negative. It's like, ooh, bad juju, and you leave. Or it's someone that, wow, that person has great energy. I really want to get to know that person. So you can't always articulate it, but you just feel it. And are you aware of that when that happens? So our subtle energy. Energy is always conserved. That's the first law of thermodynamics. And of course, energy can be converted, our second law. And this is an important one to talk about in ecopsychology. We don't have time to go into today, but entropy is very important. How I think if we learn to approach and reuse entropy, then we may have some ways to start solving some of our energy crisis. But that's another discussion on another day. So ecopsychologically, we study these forms to understand how energy affects us. How does the cold affect us? How does the heat affect us? How does another person affect us? But there's something else about energy that I want to focus on for our session today. And energy also means force of expression, or an urge. And we've heard that a little bit this week, an urgency, an urge to do this. So force of expression, or an urge. Force, the word force, meaning energy as an attribute action or movement, changing the motion of something, produced motion or stress in a stationary body, coercion, sometimes backed by threat or violence, maybe mental or moral power, influence, making someone do something against their will, forcing them, making a way into or through something, or achieved by effort. You know, this was a force to get through this particular event or situation. So force is both destructive and creative. And this is an important tenet to hold in the back of your mind as well too. That any ecosystem both has creativity as well as destruction. We humans are both creative and destructive. I think everybody probably knows that. Expression. You can see I had fun doing these slides. Expression. Action or pressing, squeezing out of something. The movement and sound of flamenco is the expression of the dancer. So how do we express ourselves? The action or manifesting the feeling about something. Putting into words. And that can be very, very difficult for us sometimes to express an emotion or feeling about something. So to understand our ecosystem's energy is then to better understand how our forces of expression, our urges, our system feedback loops, if you will, how do we use them? So how do we use our energy? So we would ask ourselves questions, and we'll do this in a minute. How do we, what gives us energy? What gives us energy? Not just food or water, but outside of that. What gives us energy? What depletes it? How do we use our energy? How do we give it away? How do we waste it? How do we misplace it? Abuse it? Misjudge it? How do we rejuvenate it or replenish it? How do we replenish our energy stocks, revitalize ourselves, restore ourselves? For the most part, I think many of us can answer some of these questions, but they also lead to some very interesting ways of thinking about our use of energy in ways that we haven't thought about before. So what I'd like to do now is, if you get into groups, you either stay with your tables or maybe just turn to your partner. That might work better. There's a few more people that, if they would join in, it might even our numbers out. Why don't we do this in twos or threes? I'll let you decide at your table. And I'm going to take you through a series of questions, and I want you to share with your group what you come up with the answers to these questions. So if you'll turn with each other, get groups of 2 or 3. And I'll ask the questions of the group, and I want you to share your answers with each other. Don't be shy. The other idea to this is, if you're not comfortable and you'd rather write your answers like in a journal type of thing, that's great too. So the first question around energy that would be interesting, and if anyone wants to share it with the group, just grab the microphone and you know, wag it, and I'll certainly call you, because if you'd like to share it, that's always fun too. It's very interesting to hear what people think about these things. So when you feel tired or depleted, what is your image of this feeling? For example, do you feel like a worn out salmon trying to swim upstream? Do you feel like an old person? Do you feel like an empty well? Do you feel like a lifeless, abandoned animal? Do you feel like a dried up riverbed? So I'm asking you to think metaphorically, to think imaginatively, if you will, to activate the imagination. Because it's very interesting, the image that you pull up, as to how you feel about this. There is a relationship there. So how do you feel when you feel tired or completely depleted? Does anybody want to share? You guys are sharing.
아, 이거 꼽아볼게. 전등기라서 잠깐만. 아, 이거? 맞나?